The Urantia book is an extensive work of 2,097 pages that presents itself as a comprehensive spiritual and cosmological revelation, first published in 1955. The text claims to have been transmitted by celestial beings to a group of humans in Chicago during the first decades of the 20th century, though its precise origins remain a subject of academic controversy and historical investigation. The structure of the work. The book is divided into four main parts. The first deals with the nature of God and the central universe. The second explores the local universe and its inhabitants. The third addresses the history of Urantia, Earth. And the fourth presents a detailed biography of Jesus of Nazareth. The texts we examine concerning the Universal Father constitute only the first of 196 documents that comprise the complete work. The interdependent complexity analysis of the 8 chapters on the Universal Father reveals a fundamental characteristic of the Urantia book, its profoundly interconnected nature. Concepts presented introductorily in these first texts, such as thought adjusters, divine personality, creator sons, and the structure of the cosmos, are developed in elaborate detail throughout hundreds of subsequent pages. This interdependence is not accidental. The text constructs a complex theological and cosmological system where each element relates to all others. Full understanding of any specific concept frequently depends on knowledge of multiple other concepts presented in different sections of the work. The necessity of complete reading. While the chapters on the Universal Father offer a majestic introduction to the book's vision of divine nature, they represent only the foundation of a much larger structure. Concepts such as thought adjusters are mentioned as fragments of the Father residing within us, but their origin, function, and destiny are explored in detail in later documents. The reference to Michael of Nebadon as our local creator, Son, gains complete meaning only through his elaborate biography in the fourth part. The journey to paradise, mentioned as the destiny of time, pilgrims is mapped in detail through multiple worlds and spheres of progress. The administrative structure of the cosmos, only sketched in these first texts, is developed with impressive specificity in subsequent sections, a critical perspective. Regardless of one's position on the book's origin claims, complete reading offers several advantages for serious study. Internal coherence. The text maintains remarkable conceptual and terminological consistency throughout its 2,097 pages, creating an internally coherent intellectual universe. Progressive development. Concepts are introduced, developed, and integrated progressively, creating layers of understanding that reveal themselves only through complete reading. Contextualization. Many statements that may seem contradictory or confusing when isolated find clarification when understood within the larger context of the presented cosmology. The value of complete study. Complete reading of the Urantia book, regardless of personal convictions about its origin, offers a unique intellectual experience, an encounter with a religious and philosophical thought system of extraordinary scope, attempting to address fundamental questions about the nature of reality, the purpose of existence, and human destiny in an integrated and comprehensive manner. For those interested in truly understanding the vision presented in these texts about the Universal Father, the journey through the complete work is not merely recommended, it is essential. Each additional page illuminates and deepens understanding of those that came before, creating an experience of progressive discovery that reflects the very spiritual journey the book describes as the destiny of every conscious personality. It is important to approach this reading with an open but critical mind, recognizing that this is a text making extraordinary claims that deserves to be evaluated with the same intellectual rigor applied to any work seeking to shape our understanding of reality and the sacred. Teleswadi Itams. Bemu, the Universal Father, a journey through divine creation. The narrative of the Universal Father unfolds as a grand revelation about divine nature and the cosmic purpose of existence. The text presents us with a majestic vision of God, not merely as a distant entity, but as the first source and center of all reality. The Cosmic Architect. The story begins by revealing the Universal Father in his triple nature, first as Supreme Creator, then as Controller of all things, and finally, as infinite sustainer of creation. This progression is not casual. It shows us how God not only gave origin to the universe, but remains intimately involved in its maintenance and direction. The text echoes ancient prophetic words that recognize this fundamental truth. You alone are God. There is none besides you. The grand purpose. The second movement of this cosmic narrative reveals the purpose behind creation. The countless galaxies, planetary systems, and worlds were not created as an empty exercise of divine power. Each planet was designed to be inhabited by various different types of intelligent creatures, beings capable not only of knowing God, but of developing a relationship of mutual love with Him. The universe thus emerges not as a cold machine, but as a vast dwelling prepared with divine care. The Great Journey. The narrative then transports us to the epic adventure that defines the existence of all conscious creatures. On all enlightened worlds, beings embark on an immensely long journey to paradise, a fascinating spiritual pilgrimage whose ultimate destination is to reach and understand God Himself. This is not an ordinary physical journey, but a progressive transformation of the soul toward divine perfection. The Supreme Commandment. At the heart of this great narrative resounds the central commandment: be perfect, even as I am perfect. This is not an impossible or cruel command, but rather the greatest gift the Universal Father could offer His creatures, the real possibility of participating in divine nature itself. The text reveals that this commandment is not reserved only for superior beings, but has reached even the lower creatures of animal origin, such as the human races of Urantia, our planet Earth. The real possibility. The narrative then directly addresses our human condition, recognizing that mortals of Urantia, we Earthlings, can hardly expect to be perfect in the infinite sense. However, the text offers a hopeful perspective. Although we cannot reach divine infinitude, we can attain complete perfection within our finite sphere. This perfection, though limited, will be genuine, final and complete in all finite aspects, in divinity, will, perfection of personality, motivation, and God consciousness. The eternal impulse. The narrative culminates by revealing that the divine commandment functions as a constant impulse that constantly propels mortal man forward and draws him inward into himself. This search for the God of the universes is presented as the supreme adventure of the inhabitants of all worlds of time and space. The Universal Father presents a profoundly optimistic and inclusive vision of human existence and the cosmos. Unlike many religious traditions that emphasize the unbridgeable distance between the divine and human, this text suggests a fundamental continuity. We are part of a cosmic plan where divine perfection is not merely an impossible ideal, but an achievable destiny. What most impresses in this narrative is how it balances cosmic grandeur with personal intimacy. The same God who sustains entire galaxies cares about the spiritual development of each individual creature. This perspective offers both humility, recognizing our smallness before the infinite, and supreme dignity, affirming our divine potential. The described journey is not an escape from the material world, but a progressive transformation that honors both our finite condition and our eternal destination. It is a vision that invites not escapism, but active engagement in the long and fascinating toil of spiritual growth, knowing that each step brings us closer to Him who is simultaneously our loving Creator, Controller, and Sustainer. Thanks we see to the name of the Father, the cosmic intimacy of the divine. This part of the great narrative takes us on a fascinating journey through the vastness of the cosmos, exploring how different creatures on countless worlds come to name the unnameable, the Universal Father, the freedom to name. The story begins with a surprising revelation. The first source and center has never revealed himself by a specific name, only by his nature. This absence of an imposed divine name is not a limitation, but rather a profound gift, the freedom for each creature to develop its own intimate understanding of the Creator. Like children who naturally call their progenitor Father, we discover that our choice of name emerges from spontaneous recognition of our personal relationship with Him, the principle of free worship. The text then reveals one of the most remarkable aspects of divine character. The universal Father never imposes any form of arbitrary recognition or forced worship. Throughout all universes, he refuses to exercise coercion over the free will of his creatures. This divine posture establishes a fundamental truth. The only worship that truly satisfies the Father is that which springs spontaneously from the hearts of creatures who voluntarily choose to recognize, love, and worship him. The narrative reaches a deeply touching moment when it reveals that the affectionate dedication of human will to doing the Father's will constitutes the most precious gift that man can offer to God. In a poetic reversal, we discover that we who live, move, and have our being in God actually have something precious to offer him, our free choice to align our will with his. The journey through cosmic names. The narrative then takes us on an epic journey through the universes, showing how different worlds and sectors have developed unique names for the same loving Father. As we approach the center of the universe of universes, he is known by names that emphasize his primacy. First source. In the universes of space, he becomes the universal center. In our local universe, he is recognized as first creative source and divine center. This progression of names is not random. Each reflects the depth of the Father's enthronement in the hearts of creatures from each region. In distant constellations, he is called Father of Universes, Infinite Sustainer, Divine Controller, Father of Lights, Gift of Life, and Only Almighty. The influence of divine sons. One of the most moving moments in the narrative occurs when we discover that on worlds where a paradise son has lived a life of self-bestowal, God generally receives names that reveal deep personal relationships of some tender affection or paternal devotion. These privileged worlds develop special intimacy with the divine, referring to him as Father of Fathers, Paradise Father, Havona Father, and the touching Our Father. The earthly reality. The narrative then turns to our own condition on Urantia, Earth, recognizing that on a planet of sexed creatures, where impulses of parental emotion are natural, the term Father becomes especially expressive and appropriate. We discover that he is best known in our world simply as God, a name that, though simple, carries all the dignity and reverence of our limited but genuine understanding of the eternal. The fundamental truth. The narrative culminates with a liberating truth. The name given to him is of little importance. What is significant is to know him and aspire to be like him. This statement dissolves all anxieties about nominal orthodoxy and invites us to what really matters, the living and transforming relationship with him whom our ancient prophets truly called the eternal God and he who inhabits eternity. The name of the Father offers a revolutionary perspective on the nature of the divine-human relationship that contrasts deeply with many authoritarian religious traditions. What emerges is a portrait of a God who values his creatures' freedom so much that he refuses to impose even his own name, preferring to be known by the quality of his relationship with us. This approach reveals a profoundly democratic and inclusive theology. Instead of establishing rigid orthodoxy about how God should be named or worshipped, the text celebrates the diversity of genuine religious expressions throughout the cosmos. Each name, each form of worship that springs from the sincere heart is seen as valid and precious. The emphasis on voluntary versus compulsory worship suggests a God of supreme emotional maturity, a Father who prefers freely given love to forced compliance with religious duties. This perspective tremendously elevates the dignity of human choice, suggesting that our capacity to freely choose to love God is precisely what makes that choice valuable to him. Perhaps the most moving aspect is the idea that, although we live completely dependent on God for our very existence, we still have something genuinely precious to offer him, our freely dedicated will. This reciprocity transforms the religious relationship from an exercise in unilateral submission to a true relationship of mutual love, where both creator and creature have something meaningful to contribute. Thasi Waihuak is the reality of God, the intimate encounter with the Absolute. This third part of the Great Revelation takes us to the heart of the most fundamental question of all, the genuine reality of God and how we can know it in an authentic and transforming way. The primordial nature. The narrative opens with a majestic declaration about God's unique position in cosmic reality. He is presented as the primordial reality in the spiritual world, the source of truth in mental spheres, and he who overshadows all material realms with his presence. For all created intelligences, God emerges not as an abstract force, but as a real personality, simultaneously the first source and center of eternal reality. Beyond reductive concepts, the text then guides us through a crucial series of clarifications about what God is not. In an age when many attempt to reduce the divine to human projections or philosophical concepts, we discover that the eternal God infinitely transcends our idealizations. He is not simply man's supreme desire transformed into objective reality, nor a mere concept of the power potential of righteousness. The narrative liberates us from common reductionisms. God is not merely personified nature, nor a psychological focus of spiritual meanings, nor even man's noblest creation. Although he may be understood through all these concepts in our limited minds, he is infinitely more. A saving person and a loving father to all who seek spiritual peace and long for eternal survival of personality. The divine interior presence. The most extraordinary moment of this revelation comes when we discover how God's reality is demonstrated in human experience, not through philosophical arguments or scientific proofs, but through the divine presence that resides within each human being, the spiritual monitor, sent directly from paradise to live in our mortal mind and assist us in the evolution of our immortal soul. This presence of the divine adjuster manifests through three deeply personal experiential phenomena. First, the intellectual capacity to know God, an innate consciousness of the divine that transcends mere academic knowledge. Second, the irresistible spiritual impulse to find God, a search that emerges from the depths of human being. Third, and perhaps most touching, the personality's yearning to be like God, a sincere desire of the whole heart to do the Father's will. The question of proof. The narrative then directly addresses one of humanity's most debated questions, proof of God's existence. With refreshing honesty, the text declares that God's existence can never be proven by scientific experience, nor by pure reason in logical deduction. However, this apparent limitation transforms into a profound revelation. God can only be understood within the realm of human experience. And for those who have become God-knowers, who have experienced the fact of his presence, there exists the only positive proof of the living God's existence that one human being can offer another, the personal testimony of a real encounter with the divine. The architecture of creation. The narrative then elevates us to a cosmic perspective, revealing the organizational structure of divine creation. We discover that although we may think of God as the creator of everything, in reality, he is the personal creator only of paradise and the central universe of perfection. The vast universes of time and space were created and organized by the paradise core of creator sons. This revelation personalizes our existence in a touching way. The local universe of Nebadon, where we live, is not the direct creation of the universal Father, but rather of his son Michael. Still, the Father is not absent. He controls all evolving universes through many of his universal relationships and through some of his manifestations of physical, mental, and spiritual energies. Divine functioning. The narrative culminates by revealing how the universal Father operates through different dimensions of reality. As physical controller, he functions through the original patterns of the eternal Isle of Paradise, exercising cosmic super-control through absolute gravity. As mind, he acts through the deity of the infinite Spirit. As Spirit, he manifests in the person of the eternal Son and his divine sons. But the most moving revelation comes at the end. Despite all this complex cosmic interrelationship, nothing excludes direct personal action by the Universal Father. Through the presence of his fragmented spirit, the thought adjuster, the Creator Father maintains direct and intimate contact with each of his creature children and with all his created universes. The reality of God offers a masterful synthesis, that resolves many of the central tensions of human religious experience. Instead of forcing a choice between faith and reason, between personal experience and cosmic reality, between intimacy and transcendence, the text presents an integrated vision where all these elements find their appropriate place. The approach to the question of proof of God is particularly wise. By honestly recognizing that divine existence is beyond scientific or logical demonstration, the text does not take refuge in blind fideism, but points to a different kind of knowledge, experiential knowledge that arises from real encounter with the divine interior presence. This perspective validates both honest intellectual skepticism and genuine experiential faith. For those who have not had such experience, epistemological humility is offered. For those who have had it, dignity and meaning are offered. The emphasis on the interior presence of the thought adjuster completely democratizes religious experience. Every person carries within themselves the potential for direct encounter with the divine. The revelation about the structure of creation through Creator Sons adds a fascinating dimension of cosmic personalization. Discovering that our local universe has a personal creator, Michael of Nebadon, makes our existence less impersonal while still connecting us to the vastness of the greater cosmic plan. It's like discovering that, although we live in a great city, the cosmos, we have a local mayor, Michael, who really knows and cares about our specific neighborhood. Perhaps most profoundly, this section reveals a God who is simultaneously transcendent and immanent, cosmic and personal, complex in his universal manifestation, but simple in his direct paternal love. The final image of the Father maintaining personal contact through fragments of his own spirit suggests a level of divine intimacy that surpasses even the closest human relationships. Asatawang Sibeskama's God is a universal spirit, the revelation of invisible divine nature. This fourth part of the Great Revelation takes us to the heart of one of existence's deepest mysteries, God's spiritual nature, and how material creatures like us can relate to a reality completely transcendent to the physical world. The fundamental declaration. The narrative opens with one of the simplest yet most revolutionary statements in all religious literature. God is spirit. This apparently simple statement unfolds into a complex revelation about universal reality. The universal Father is presented as a universal spiritual presence, an infinite spiritual reality, the eternal, immortal, invisible sovereign, and the only true God. The paradox of divine image. One of the most enlightening moments in the narrative occurs when it directly addresses an ancient confusion. Although we are God's offspring and created in his image, this does not mean the Father is like us in physical form and aspect. The true divine image in us manifests through the presence of the mystery monitors, fragments of the divine presence itself that reside in our mortal mind, coming directly from the central dwelling of the eternal presence. This revelation elegantly resolves the ancient theological question. We are made in God's image not physically, but spiritually, through the interior presence of divine spirit itself. The majestic invisibility. The narrative then takes us through a poetic exploration of why God remains invisible to mortal eyes. Quoting an ancient seer, we discover that, "He passes by me, and I do not see him. He passes me, but I do not perceive him." However, this invisibility is not divine hide-and-seek. We constantly observe God's works and can be extremely conscious of evidence of his majestic conduct, but we can rarely contemplate the visible manifestation of his divinity. The explanation is both humble and majestic. You cannot see my face, because no mortal can see me and live. The spiritual luminosity of the Father's personal presence is described as a light which no mortal man can approach. It is not that God hides from us, but that our material nature simply cannot withstand direct encounter with such spiritual glory. The spiritual Trinity. The narrative then rises to reveal one of the most sublime aspects of divine nature, the shared spiritual nature of the Paradise Trinity. The universal Father fully shares his spiritual nature with the eternal Son. Both in turn share the eternal and universal Spirit fully and unrestrictedly with the infinite Spirit, their coordinated conjoint personality. This revelation presents an elegant vision of divine unity. God's Spirit is absolute in himself, unqualifiable in the Son, universal in the Spirit, and infinite in all and through all of them. The hierarchy of reality. A crucial moment in the narrative occurs when we discover the fundamental hierarchy of cosmic reality. The supreme personal reality of finite creation is spirit. The ultimate reality of personal cosmos is absolute spirit. Only on levels of infinitude does true unity exist between matter, mind, and spirit, a revelation that places our material existence in proper cosmic perspective. Divine government. The narrative then reveals how God operates as super-controller of matter, mind, and spirit throughout all universes. Although he deals directly with personalities through the immense circuit of his own personality, outside paradise, he is contactable primarily through the presences of his fragmented entities, the thought adjusters who represent God's will throughout the vastness of universes. The journey of transformation. The narrative's climax comes when we discover the process of spiritual transformation that defines human destiny. In man's interior experience, mind initially finds itself bound to matter, and minds thus bound cannot survive mortal death. The technique of survival is revealed as a gradual process where the God-conscious intellect gradually allows itself to be taught by spirit and finally allows itself to be guided by it. This evolution results in transmutation of the potentially spiritual phases of mortal mind into the morontial realities of the immortal soul. The narrative presents two dramatic possibilities. Mind subservient to matter is destined to become increasingly material, suffering final extinction of personality. But mind surrendered to spirit is destined to become increasingly spiritual, finally achieving unification with divine spirit and winning eternal survival. Personal testimony. The narrative culminates with one of the most touching moments in the entire revelation, personal testimony from one who directly knows the universal Father. I proceed from the eternal and have repeatedly returned to the presence of the universal Father. I know of the reality and personality of the first source and center. This intimate testimony reveals that although the great God is absolute, eternal, and infinite, he is also good, divine, and full of grace. The final revelation confirms the truth of the great declarations, God is spirit and God is love, attributes that have been and are being revealed to the universe most completely by the eternal Son. God is a universal spirit, offers a masterful synthesis that resolves some of the deepest tensions between faith and human experience. The approach to divine invisibility is particularly wise. Instead of presenting it as a problem to be solved or a limitation to be overcome, the text reveals it as a natural manifestation of the qualitative difference between spiritual and material realities. The explanation about being created in God's image is revolutionary in its simplicity. By locating this image not in physical characteristics, but in the interior presence of divine spirit itself, the text completely transcends debates about divine anthropomorphism. We are like God, not because he is like us, but because we literally carry a part of him within us. The revelation about the technique of survival offers a profoundly optimistic perspective on human destiny. Instead of presenting life after death as something that happens automatically or must be conquered through external rituals, the text reveals it as the natural result of conscious choices of spiritual alignment made during mortal life. Perhaps the most moving aspect is the final personal testimony. Amid all the great cosmic revelations, we discover that someone who directly knows the universal Father confirms that he is not only powerful and transcendent, but also good, divine, and full of grace. This combination of infinite power with personal goodness offers a solid foundation for trust and relationship, even in the face of inevitable mystery surrounding divine nature. The emphasis on the shared spiritual nature of the Trinity suggests a divine unity that transcends our limited understandings of individual personality while still maintaining the reality of distinct personal relationships. It is a vision that honors both unity and diversity as fundamental aspects of divine nature itself. The mystery of God, the paradox of infinite intimacy. This fifth part of the Great Revelation takes us to the heart of one of existence's deepest paradoxes. how the infinite can inhabit the finite, and how limited creatures can have genuine experience with the unlimited. The supreme mystery. The narrative opens with a statement that defines the entire mystery of divine existence. The infinitude of God's perfection is such that it makes him an eternal mystery. But among all unfathomable mysteries, one stands above all others: the phenomenon of divine indwelling in mortal minds. This is not an abstract or distant mystery. It is the mystery of mysteries, how the Universal Father coexists with creatures of time, how divine presence can literally inhabit human mind. This revelation transforms every moment of our conscious existence into proximity with the sacred that defies all comprehension. Living temples. The narrative then elevates us to a revolutionary understanding of our own physical nature. The physical bodies of mortals are temples of God. This is not poetic metaphor, but literal reality. Although sovereign creator sons approach their creatures, knocking at the door of consciousness and rejoicing to enter all those who open the doors of their hearts, there is something even more intimate. Mortal human beings have something of God himself actually residing within them. This interior presence transforms every human body into a sacred sanctuary, every mind into a divine dwelling. Holiness is not located in external buildings, but in the living reality of every conscious person. The destiny of the divine fragment. The narrative then takes us through one of the most touching passages about human destiny after death. When our temporary earthly career is concluded, when the journey of trials in the flesh is finished, the physical body will return to the earth from which it came. But there is an extraordinary revelation. The resident spirit will return to God, who bestowed it. Within every mortal being of this planet literally resides a fragment of God, a part of the whole of divinity. This fragment does not yet belong to us by right of possession, but its intentional design is to unify with us if we survive after our mortal existence. It is a union planned from the beginning, a divine human fusion that represents the ultimate destiny of personality. The constant perplexity. The narrative honestly recognizes that we are constantly confronted with this mystery of God and are perplexed by the growing development of the infinite panorama of his inexhaustible goodness, inexhaustible mercy, incomparable wisdom, and supreme character. We are not invited to completely resolve the mystery, but to live in constant admiration before it. The inherent difference. The heart of the divine mystery is then revealed. It consists in the inherent difference that exists between the finite and the infinite, the temporal and the eternal, the time-space creature and the universal creator, the material and the spiritual, man's imperfection and the perfection of paradise deity. But this difference does not create an insurmountable barrier. On the contrary, unfailingly, the God of universal love manifests himself to each of his creatures, to the fullness of the creature's capacity to spiritually apprehend the qualities of divine truth, beauty, and goodness. To our proportional revelation. One of the most consoling revelations of this narrative is that the Universal Father reveals everything of his divine and gracious being, everything that can be discerned or understood by each creature on all spheres and worlds of the universe of universes. God has no personal preferences, neither for spiritual nor material beings. The only limitation in divine revelation does not come from God, but is limited only by the capacity that such creature has to receive and discern the spiritual realities of the supramaterial world. This perspective completely transforms our understanding of limited revelation. It is not that God withholds information, but that our reception capacity determines how much we can experience of divine infinitude. The resolution of the paradox. The narrative culminates with an elegant resolution of the apparent paradox. As a reality in human spiritual experience, God is not a mystery. The mystery arises only when physical minds of material order attempt to clarify the realities of the spiritual world using purely material categories. These mysteries are so subtle and so profound that only faith understanding in God-knowing mortals can accomplish the philosophical miracle of recognizing the infinite by the finite. Faith is not presented here as blind credulity, but as a special type of perception that enables discernment of the eternal God. By evolving mortals in the material worlds of time and space, the mystery of God offers a profoundly sophisticated approach to one of the central dilemmas of religious experience: how to reconcile divine transcendence with personal intimacy. The text resolves this paradox not by denying either side, but by revealing how both coexist in a synthesis that transcends our purely material logic. The revelation about human bodies as temples of God is revolutionary in its implications. It completely shifts the center of sacredness from external institutions to the living reality of each person. This perspective has profound ethical implications. If every person is literally a divine temple, then respectful and loving treatment of all human beings becomes not merely a moral issue, but a matter of religious reverence. The description of the interior divine fragment that seeks unification with us presents an extraordinarily optimistic vision of human destiny. Instead of an external relationship between worshipper and object of worship, we are invited to literal union with divinity, a fusion that preserves our individuality while elevating us to participation in divine nature itself. The approach to the question of mystery is particularly wise. Honestly recognizing that there are aspects of God that remain incomprehensible to finite minds, the text does not take refuge in mystery as an excuse to avoid rigorous thinking. Instead, it suggests that true knowledge of God comes through direct spiritual experience, which transcends but does not contradict reason. The emphasis on proportional revelation to capacity offers a democratic and hopeful perspective. Every person, regardless of intellectual level or formal education, has access to the maximum divine revelation they can receive and process. This eliminates any spiritual elitism and affirms that genuine experience with God is available to all. Perhaps most profoundly, this section reveals that God's mystery is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. It is an invitation to live in constant admiration, recognizing that our understanding will always be limited, but that our experience can be infinitely expanded through development of our spiritual capacity for perception. The personality of the Universal Father, the paradox of personal infinitude. This sixth part of the Great Revelation leads us through one of theology's most fascinating paradoxes: how the infinite can be simultaneously personal, and how finite creatures can have a genuine relationship with a personality that transcends all understanding. The initial warning. The narrative opens with a prophetic alert. Do not permit the magnitude and infinitude of God to obscure or eclipse your vision of His personality. This warning sets the tone for the entire discussion. There is a natural tendency for finite minds to become lost in contemplating divine grandeur, forgetting that behind all that immensity exists a real person. The revelation then echoes ancient prophetic words: "He who planned the ear, shall he not hear? He who formed the eye, shall he not see?" The Universal Father is presented as the height of divine personality, not merely one personality among many, but the origin and destiny of all personality in creation. He is both infinite and personal, an infinite personality whose infinitude always places him beyond full comprehension by material and finite beings. The supreme concept. The narrative then directly confronts the limitation of our understanding. God is much more than a personality as understood by human mind. He even transcends any concept of superpersonality. However, we discover that it is totally useless to discuss such incomprehensible concepts with minds of material creatures for whom personality represents the maximum in understanding the reality of being. This limitation is not a definitive barrier, but a starting point. The highest concept that the material creature has of the universal creator is encompassed in the spiritual ideals of an elevated idea of divine personality. Although we may know that God must be more than our human conception of personality, we equally know that the Universal Father cannot certainly be anything less than an eternal, infinite, true, good, and beautiful personality. The question of accessibility. The narrative then addresses the apparent contradiction between divine proximity and distance. God is not hiding from any of His creatures. He is unapproachable to so many orders of beings only because He dwells in a light which no material creature can approach. Through a series of poetic quotations, we are reminded of divine immensity. He measures the waters in the hollow of his hands, evaluates a universe with the palm of his hand. He is the one who sits in the circle of the earth, who extends the heavens like a curtain. But this grandeur is not a barrier. We must discern the invisible Creator through his diverse and multiple creations, as well as through the revelation and ministry of his sons. The certainty of personality. A touching moment in the narrative occurs when we discover that, although material mortals cannot see the person of God, they should rejoice in the certainty that he is a person. By faith, we must accept the truth that the universal Father so loved the world that he provided for the eternal spiritual growth of its humblest inhabitants, and that he rejoices with his children. Manifestation through sons. The narrative then reveals one of the most consoling truths about how God becomes accessible in local creations. Although he has no direct personal manifestations beyond Paradise Creator sons, we discover that these sons are literally manifestations of the Father. If the creature's faith were perfect, it would know with certainty that, when it had seen a Creator Son, it had seen the universal Father. This revelation establishes a fundamental truth. The Father and his sons are one. Paradise sons of Michael's order are perfect personalities, original patterns even, of all universe personalities, from that of the bright and morning star to the most primitive human creatures, the source of all personality. The climax of the revelation about personality comes in a simple but profound statement. Without God, and apart from his exalted central person, there would be no personality throughout the vast universe of universes. God is personality. This is not merely a statement about God's nature, but about all reality. All personality in the cosmos derives from and depends upon the primordial personality of the universal Father. The reality of relationship. The narrative then reaches its most touching moment. Although God is an eternal power, a majestic presence, a transcendent ideal, a glorious spirit, he is truly and forever a perfect creator personality, a person who can know and be known, who can love and be loved, and who can demonstrate friendship for us. This revelation completely transforms the nature of the divine-human relationship. You can be recognized, as other human beings have been, as friends of God. The measure of religious maturity. The narrative then reveals a fundamental principle about spiritual development. The truth and maturity of any religion is directly proportional to its concept of the infinite personality of God and to its understanding of the absolute unity of God. This perspective traces religious evolution from primitive religion, with its many personal gods molded in man's image, to mature understanding of a unique infinite personality. Only through the idea of personality can any person begin to understand the unity of God. Transcendent personality. The narrative clarifies a common confusion. A material body is not indispensable to personality, whether in man or in God. Materialism errs by equating personality with corporality. Pantheism errs by denying personality due to absence of body. True, progressive, superhuman personality functions in a union of mind and spirit. Expanded divine experience. One of the most extraordinary revelations comes when we discover that, although God does not acquire experience like finite creatures, he enjoys, within the scope of his own eternal personality, continuous expansions of self-realization, comparable to the acquisition of new experiences by evolutionary creatures. Even more profoundly, the universal Father participates directly in the personality struggle of every imperfect soul, seeking to ascend to celestial worlds. This progressive experience of every spiritual being and every mortal creature throughout the universe of universes is a portion of the Father's ever-expanding deity consciousness. Intimate participation. The narrative culminates with one of the most touching statements in all spiritual literature. It is literally true that, in all your afflictions, he is afflicted. In all your triumphs, he triumphs in you and with you. The universal Father has, in full divine consciousness, all the individual experience of the progressive struggles of expanding minds and ascending spirits, of every entity, being, and personality in all evolutionary creation. And all this is true because in him we all live, move, and have our being. The personality of the Universal Father offers an extraordinary synthesis that resolves one of theology's deepest paradoxes: how to reconcile divine transcendence with personal intimacy. The text manages to maintain in creative tension both God's infinitude and personality without sacrificing either. The approach to the question of divine manifestation through Creator sons is particularly important. Instead of presenting separation between the distant Father and accessible intermediaries, it reveals a fundamental unity where seeing the Son is literally seeing the Father. This perspective eliminates any sense that we are dealing with second-class representatives of the divine. The revelation about God, as the source of all personality in the cosmos, offers a revolutionary perspective on our own nature. If our personality derives directly from divine personality, then our capacity to know and be known, love and be loved, is not merely a human characteristic, but participation in divine nature itself. Perhaps the most moving aspect is the idea that God experiences with us every struggle and triumph. This is not merely divine empathy, but literal participation in creature experience. It suggests a God who not only observes our journey from the outside, but who truly lives with us every moment of our spiritual evolution. The emphasis on personality as a measure of religious maturity offers a clear criterion for evaluating spiritual development. Religions that reduce God to impersonal forces or fragment him into multiple lesser divinities are seen as necessary evolutionary stages, but not as the final destination of spiritual understanding. This perspective suggests that relationship with God is not fundamentally different from deep human relationships. It involves mutual knowledge, reciprocal love, and even genuine friendship. The difference lies only in scale and depth, not in the basic nature of the relationship. It is a vision that tremendously elevates the dignity of personal religious experience, suggesting that every moment of communion with God is a genuine encounter between real personalities. Vi så tar a personality in the universe, the cosmic mirror of divinity. This seventh part of the Great Revelation leads us through a fascinating exploration of how personality functions as the connecting thread between human and divine, revealing both our limitations and our transcendent potential. The shadow and substance. The narrative opens with a powerful metaphor. Human personality is an image, a time-space shadow cast by the divine creator personality. This is not a diminutive comparison, but a revealing one. Like all shadows, our personality points to something much greater, the true substance of divine personality. The warning is wise. No fact can ever be adequately understood by examining its shadow. Shadows must be interpreted in terms of true substance. This perspective completely transforms our self-understanding. We are not merely isolated creatures trying to imagine God, but living reflections of divine personality itself. The three perspectives. The narrative then reveals how different approaches to reality perceive God in distinct ways. For science, God is a primordial cause. For philosophy, a hypothesis of unity. For religion, a living spiritual experience, or even the loving Heavenly Father. Each perspective captures something true but limited. The scientist sees a force, the philosopher an idea, but the religious person encounters a real person. This progression suggests that, while science and philosophy are valuable, only genuine religious experience can reach the complete reality of divine personality. The journey of perfection. One of the most hopeful revelations comes when we discover that man's inadequate concept of the Universal Father's personality can be perfected only by man's own spiritual progress in the universe. This inadequacy is not a condemnation, but an invitation to growth. The concept will only become truly adequate when the pilgrims of time and finite space finally reach the divine embrace of the living God on paradise. This is a journey, not an immediate destination, and the journey itself is part of the understanding process. The question of perspective. The narrative then alerts us to never lose sight of the antipodal aspects of personality. as conceived by God and as seen by man. This difference in perspective is fundamental. Man sees and understands personality, looking from the finite to the infinite. God looks from the infinite to the finite. Man possesses the lowest type of personality. God, the highest, supreme even, ultimate and absolute. But there is hope. The best concepts of divine personality had to wait patiently for the emergence of more evolved ideas of human personality. Michael's revelation. The most significant moment in this narrative occurs when we discover there was a special revelation of both human personality and divine personality made in the bestowal life that Michael led on Urantia, a life of self-bestowal as Creator-Son. This reference to Michael, Jesus, is not merely historical, but revelatory. Through a real human life, both human and divine personality were demonstrated in their most perfect form. The requirements for personal knowledge. The narrative then reveals the prerequisites for knowing a divine personality. Although the pre-personal divine spirit residing in mortal mind brings valid proof of its existence, the concept of divine personality can be achieved only by spiritual interior discernment in genuine religious experience. More profoundly, we discover that a certain moral affinity and spiritual harmony are essential to friendship between two persons. A loving personality can hardly reveal itself to a person incapable of love. To know a divine personality, all the gifts of man's personality must be entirely consecrated to such effort. Partial devotion with half a heart will be of no avail. The virtuous circle of knowledge. One of the most beautiful revelations in the narrative is about the virtuous circle of spiritual growth. The more completely man understands himself and appreciates the values of personality in his fellows, the more he will long to know the original personality, and the more earnestly such a God-knowing human being will strive to become like the original personality. This perspective transforms self-knowledge and love for others into steps on the ladder leading to divine knowledge. Beyond controversy. The narrative then offers a crucial distinction. Based on opinions, you may argue about God. Experience with Him, and in Him, however, is above and beyond any human controversy and mere intellectual logic. The God-knowing man does not describe his spiritual experiences to convince unbelievers, but for the edification and mutual satisfaction of believers. This perspective liberates genuine religious experience from the need for external justification, the intelligibility of the universe. One of the most elegant proofs for divine personality comes through the very intelligibility of the universe. To assume that the universe can be known, that it is intelligible, is to assume that the universe was made by mind and is administered by personality. The logic is simple but profound. Only man's mind can perceive the mental phenomenon of other minds. If our personality can experience and understand the universe, then there is a divine mind and a real personality hidden somewhere in this universe. The perfect demonstration. The narrative culminates with the most touching revelation. God is spirit, spiritual personality. Man also is a spirit, a potential spiritual personality. This fundamental resemblance makes possible mutual relationship and understanding. The supreme example of this possibility is revealed. Jesus of Nazareth attained the full realization of the potential of spiritual personality in human experience. Consequently, his life becomes the most real and ideal revelation of God's personality. Although the Universal Father's personality can only be apprehended through genuine religious experience, we are inspired by the perfect demonstration of this realization in Jesus' earthly life, a truly human experience that perfectly reveals divine personality. Personality in the universe offers an extraordinary synthesis that resolves many fundamental tensions about how finite creatures can know the infinite. The shadow metaphor is particularly powerful. Our personality is not an independent creation trying to imagine God, but literally a projection of divine personality in time and space. The discussion of different disciplinary perspectives, scientific, philosophical, religious, is especially valuable in an era of academic specialization. The text does not devalue science or philosophy, but suggests that only religious experience can reach the personal dimension of divine reality. This perspective offers a foundation for respectful dialogue between different approaches to knowledge. The emphasis on moral requirements for knowing God is deeply significant. The idea that a loving personality can hardly reveal itself to a person incapable of love suggests that divine knowledge is not purely intellectual, but requires character transformation. This perspective explains why intellectually brilliant people sometimes seem blind to spiritual realities, while simple but loving people often demonstrate profound spiritual wisdom. The reference to Jesus as the perfect demonstration of divine personality in human experience is revolutionary in its implications. It suggests that incarnation was not merely a salvific event, but an epistemological revelation, a demonstration of how divine personality can be expressed within the limitations of human experience. Perhaps most profoundly, this section reveals that the very fact that we can understand and experience the universe is evidence of divine personality. Our capacity to know points to a mind that can be known. Our capacity to love points to a heart that can love us in return. It is a perspective that tremendously dignifies both human experience and the possibility of genuine relationship with the divine. The emphasis on experience as being above and beyond any controversy offers a solid foundation for faith that does not depend on intellectual argumentation, while still honoring reason's appropriate role in spiritual life. It is a perspective that can offer peace to both honest skeptics and sincere believers. Daastamarsas chuid the spiritual value of the personality concept, the key to divine friendship. This eighth and final part of the great revelation about the Universal Father leads us to the heart of why divine personality is essential for any real relationship with God, culminating in a surprising identification of the source of this extraordinary revelation: Jesus' reference. The narrative opens by invoking the supreme authority of human experience. When Jesus spoke of the living God, he specifically referred to a personal deity, the Father in heaven. This was not a casual choice of language, but a fundamental revelation about the nature of the divine-human relationship. The concept of deity's personality is presented as having three transforming benefits. It facilitates friendship, favors intelligent worship, and promotes natural and free trust. The logic is simple but profound. Interactions may occur between non-personal things, but not friendship. The foundation of relationship. The revelation then establishes a fundamental principle: the relationship of friendship between father and child, as well as between God and man, cannot be enjoyed unless both are persons. This truth transcends all categories of relationship. Only personalities can truly commune with one another. Interestingly, we discover that this personal communion can be immensely facilitated by the presence of such an impersonal entity as the thought adjuster. This apparent contradiction reveals the subtle complexity of spiritual experience, personal and impersonal elements working in harmony. The nature of divine union. One of the most important clarifications in the narrative directly addresses how union with God actually works. Man achieves union with God, but not as a drop of water might find unity with the ocean. This is not a dissolution of individuality, but something much richer. True divine union happens through progressive spiritual communion, through personality relationship with the personal God. The process involves achieving, in a growing way, the divine nature through intelligent, wholehearted conformity to the divine will. This is a union that preserves and elevates personality, not absorbing it. The three supreme realities. The narrative then explores the relationship between personality and supreme values. The concept of truth could certainly be maintained apart from personality. The concept of beauty can exist without personality, but the concept of divine goodness is understandable only in relation to personality. This revelation is profound. Only a person can love and be loved. Even beauty and truth would have no hope of survival if they were not attributes of a personal God, a Father full of love. Divine personality is not merely a characteristic of God, It is the foundation of all enduring cosmic significance. The paradox of perfection in change. The narrative then directly addresses one of theology's most challenging paradoxes. We cannot entirely understand how God can be primordial, unchanging, all-powerful, and perfect, and at the same time be surrounded by an ever-changing and apparently law-limited universe, an evolving universe of relative imperfections. But there is a key to understanding this mystery. We can know such truth in our own personal experience because we all maintain identity of personality and unity of will, despite constant changes, not only in ourselves, but also in our environment. Our own experience of personal continuity amid constant change gives us a clue to understanding how God can be eternally the same in an evolving universe. The limit of intellectual approaches. A crucial moment in the narrative establishes the fundamental limits of purely rational understanding. The ultimate reality of the universe cannot be grasped by mathematics, nor by logic, nor by philosophy. Only personal experience can grasp it in progressive conformity with the divine will of a personal God. This is not a rejection of reason, but a recognition of its limits. Neither science, nor philosophy, nor theology can attest to God's personality. Only the personal experience of the faith children of the Heavenly Father can make effective the spiritual understanding of God's personality. The elements of supreme personality. The narrative then reveals the highest concepts of personality in the universe: identity, self-consciousness, self-will, and possibility of self-revelation. But there is more. These characteristics imply a communion of friendship with other personalities, equal and different, such as exists in the associations of the personalities of paradise deities. The paradoxical unity. One of the most mysterious revelations addresses how divine unity coexists with multiplicity. The absolute unity of these associations is so perfect that divinity becomes known by indivisibility and unity. The Lord God is one. We discover that the indivisibility of personality does not interfere with God's bestowal of His Spirit to live in human hearts. As analogy, the indivisibility of a human father's personality does not prevent him from reproducing mortal sons and daughters. The transcendence of ultimacy. The narrative rises to contemplate supreme transcendence. This concept of indivisibility, associated with the concept of unity, results in the transcendence of both time and space, made by the ultimacy of deity. Therefore, neither space nor time can be absolute or infinite. Only the first source and center is the infinitude, which unqualifiably transcends all mind, all matter, and all spirit. The Paradise Trinity. The discussion culminates with an explanation of the Trinity. The existence of the Paradise Trinity is a fact that does not violate in any way the truth of divine unity. The three personalities of Paradise deity are one in all their reactions to universe reality and in all relations with creatures. The humility of revelation. The narrative then reaches a moment of touching honesty. I am fully conscious that I do not have adequate language to make clear to mortal mind how these universe questions show themselves to us. But there is consolation, nor are all these things totally clear, even to the high personalities belonging to my group of paradise beings. Growth in understanding is presented as an eternal process. The deep truths respecting deity will become clearer and clearer as your minds progressively become more spiritualized during the successive epochs of the long mortal ascent to paradise. The revelation of source. The narrative ends with an extraordinary revelation about who is presenting all this information. Presented by a divine counselor, member of a group of celestial personalities designated by the Ancients of Days on Uversa, headquarters of the government of the seventh super-universe, to supervise the following portions of this forthcoming revelation. The author identifies himself with impressive credentials. I have served as divine counselor in all 7 super-universes and have long resided at the center of all things on Paradise. Many times have I enjoyed the supreme pleasure of a sojourn in the direct presence of the Universal Father. The final statement carries supreme authority. I portray the reality and truth of the Father's nature and attributes with unquestionable authority. I know whereof I speak. The spiritual value of the personality concept offers a masterful synthesis that resolves one of religious experience's most fundamental questions: why divine personality is absolutely essential for any real relationship with God. The text demonstrates that without personality, there can be no genuine friendship, true love, or meaningful spiritual growth. The discussion of divine union is particularly valuable in an era that often confuses spiritual union with dissolution of individuality. The rejected metaphor of the water drop losing itself in the ocean is replaced by a much richer vision of progressive communion that preserves and elevates individual personality. The approach to the limits of purely intellectual understanding is wise and balanced. Instead of rejecting reason, the text recognizes its appropriate domains while affirming that ultimate reality can only be known through personal experience. This perspective offers dignity to both intellectual investigation and direct spiritual experience. The honesty about mysteries that remain even for elevated celestial beings is deeply refreshing. This epistemic humility suggests that growth in understanding is an eternal process, not something that can be completed at any finite point of existence. Perhaps most significantly, the revelation of the source of this information completely transforms our perspective on the entire document. Discovering that these revelations come from a being who many times has enjoyed the supreme pleasure of a sojourn in the direct presence of the Universal Father, and who knows whereof he speaks with unquestionable authority, adds extraordinary weight to every word. This final identification is not an appeal to arbitrary authority, but an explanation of experiential competence. As someone seeking to describe God's personality, this divine counselor offers not theories or speculations, but direct testimony based on prolonged personal experience with the very reality he is describing. The complete series on the Universal Father thus emerges as not merely a theological treatise, but a first-hand experiential report about the nature of the God we know through faith, but who can be known much more completely through the eternal journey of spiritual growth that awaits us.